Hi, this is Jonathan Quail, breath coach, and thank you so much for visiting this page to find out a little bit more about what breath coaching can possibly do for you. So before I tell you that, firstly I'd like to tell you a little bit more about me and why I'm qualified to help you to correct any breathing problems that you have, and also teach you what I call the high performance breathing system, which I'll talk a little bit more about in this video. So my experience with breathing and breathwork started when I was an up-and-coming professional squash player in my mid-20s. I was in the UK at the time, playing and training professionally, and I decided to learn a meditation technique called transcendental meditation, because I thought it might help me to improve my game. And I told my teacher, my TM teacher, that I was playing squash professionally. And he recommended that I read a book called Body, Mind and Sport, written by a former triathlete who had studied yogic science and breathing, and he found that it really worked for him. In the book he made some pretty bold claims about what breathing, using a form of yogic breathing called Ujjayi, could do for any athlete or sportsman's endurance, their performance, and also, most importantly, their enjoyment of their sport. So I was an up-and-coming squash player, I was ambitious, I was always looking for ways to improve my game, get an edge over my competition. So I decided to apply the breathing techniques and the exercise methodology that he taught in the book over a period of about 3 or 4 months of summer training when I wasn't competing in England, where I was based at the time. It wasn't easy, but by the autumn I'd trained myself to breathe through my nose when I was playing squash competitively or just training intensively, which dramatically improved my endurance and performance. And I found that when I breathed through my nose, I could get through training sessions that had previously been really exhausting for me when I was breathing through my mouth fairly effortlessly. I also started to enjoy my training a lot more, and I had no more psychological resistance to it because of the pain that I knew I was going to have to go through, which if you've ever done hard training you'll know is often a factor. I remember one day playing a league match that lasted about 45 minutes, and I played pretty well. I won the match, and then I wasn't tired at all, so I went to an empty court next door and I decided to do some ghosting, which is just a form of training we do in squash where you move around the court fairly quickly, just simulating shots without the ball. And I did that for half an hour with no rest because I just didn't get tired. When I finally came off the court, more because I needed to get showered and changed before the club closed than because I was tired, I remember thinking just how effortless and enjoyable the whole experience had been. It hadn't felt like hard work or training at all, whereas as a mouth breather, doing the same workout would have absolutely shattered me. In fact, I don't think I could have done it. I would have had to have taken a rest. So I knew I'd opened the door to something profound. It would help me to perform at a much higher level with a lot less effort and stress than I could have dreamed was possible before then. And so it's proven to be over the last 20 odd years. And when I stopped playing professionally, I was able to compete at a pretty high level, provincial. I played provincially for Gauteng in South Africa, and also First League in Johannesburg, for over 10 years without doing very much training. I play 2 or 3 times a week, do maybe a little bit of training afterwards, but nothing like I was doing. But I was still able to compete with guys who were much younger, much fitter, because my fitness is based on the efficiency of my breathing rather than the amount of training that I've done. And this I couldn't lose because I'd mastered the art of nasal breathing by exercising at high intensity. About 10 years after I first learned nasal breathing while I exercised, I had a chance encounter with an eccentric old guy named Barry Spitz was his name, which really opened up a whole field of breathwork for me. We got chatting in my yoga studio just around in a print shop just around the corner from my yoga studio. And I told him that I was a former professional squash player and I was still playing at a pretty high level at that stage. He told me that he'd he learned some powerful breathing techniques that boosted sporting endurance and performance when he'd lived in Monaco and trained for the Monaco Olympic team 20 years earlier. Now, he wasn't an Olympic athlete, but he was a very persuasive lawyer who lived there. There was only one gym in Monaco, and somehow he managed to gate crash their training sessions. And within 5 minutes, he'd offered to teach me everything he knew about breathwork at no charge. Well, my interest was piqued, and that was an offer I couldn't really refuse. So I went to his house that Saturday morning, and he taught me a power breathing technique that he'd learned in Monaco from their Olympic trainer, who'd learned it from the head Russian Olympic trainer in the 1960s and 70s. And he also taught me an ancient breathing technique called Kriya Yoga. I eventually mastered to the point where I could hold my breath for more than half an hour. Now, don't try that at home. It did take me about 6 months to get to that level, but just to prove to myself that the supposed limit of 5 minutes of breath holding before a person passes out or dies is really nonsense. It's just not true. The limits are, well, there are no limits actually. There are yogis who've held their breath for days on end. So my feat isn't particularly exceptional. I've also done thousands of hours of yogic breathing during yoga sessions. I've done yoga for 15 years. I've trained with some of the world's leading experts on breathwork, including Dan Brule, who probably is the world's leading breathwork expert, Barry Spitz, I mentioned him already, the Art of Living Foundation, I've done one of their courses, and many other practitioners of things like holotropic, transformational and rebirthing breathing, which I've learned over the last 20 years, and probably about 20 different breathing techniques that I've learned and taught others. I've taught a lot of these techniques to hundreds of ordinary people over the last 10 years in breathwork workshops and retreats, as well as to mentally ill patients. One of the soccer teams in the PSL, which is the top professional soccer league in South Africa, and I'm in discussions to hopefully do that with the national team, but that's not confirmed yet, so I won't say I've done it. I'm just hoping that it will happen in preparation for their upcoming tournament in the African Cup of Nations, and also several top professional and junior sportsmen. There are only 3 breathing techniques in the high performance breathing system, so I want to keep it nice and simple and doable. And also because more techniques just aren't necessary to get the desired result of, first of all, solving your breathing problems if you've got any problems like asthma, exercise-induced asthma, panic attacks, hyperventilation, and so on. And also, secondly, to significantly improve your performance, not just on the sports field, but in all areas of your life. So I'll talk a little bit more about these 3 techniques now. And I've included more information in writing on the page below if you scroll down. So the first technique is breath watching. And this is a very simple relaxation technique I'll teach you that will help you to consciously relax at any point during your day and restore your mind to a state of calm. It's the quickest, most effective way to reduce stress in any situation. So I'll teach you how to incorporate it into your day in a series of breath breaks. If you're a competitive sportsman or woman, practicing this technique regularly and in the build-up to your event will help you to relax and not burn out too much mental and emotional energy before your match or race. So you come into your race or match mentally relaxed, calm and clear, but with just the optimal amount, the right amount of cortisol and adrenaline, which are stress hormones, in your system, so that you can perform at your peak in the competition or the race. If you go into the competition, into your performance in a state where you're either over-aroused, in other words, you have too much cortisol and adrenaline in your system, or you're understimulated, you're too relaxed and lackadaisical, you just can't perform at your peak. You'll tire more quickly if you're overstressed, because you'll be in the fight or flight response mode, which tires you out, or you'll just be kind of flat and unfocused if you're too relaxed. So it's about getting the balance absolutely right And breathing really, it does help to do that. Staying calm beforehand, and then doing some power breathing, which is the third technique that I'll share, just before your performance, will help you get into that optimal state for peak performance, the optimal state of arousal between relaxation and stress. There's this optimal state where you'll perform at your peak, and that's what you want to try and consciously orchestrate using these breathing techniques. Now this relaxation technique, the breath watching technique, works because deep nasal breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system rather than the sympathetic one. It also creates alpha range brainwave patterns, which means that doing it naturally relaxes both the mind and the body, and it counters the tendency to go into the fight or flight state. It's triggered by anxiety and excessive thinking about the outcome of the game and your own performance. If you're a player or a competitor, or you're the coach of a team, doing these relaxation sessions together as a team rather than individually will also help you to unify the team and create a team spirit that will translate into better performance on the pitch. So the second technique I want to talk about is deep diaphragmatic nasal breathing during exercise, which is known as the Ujjayi breath in yoga. You might have done some yoga and heard of it. It's quite appropriate. It means to become victorious in Sanskrit. And using this while you're training and competing has been shown to improve the performance of athletes and sports people significantly and prevent problems like hyperventilation, exercise-induced asthma, and fatigue through overtraining. And the best research on the subject has been done by Dr. John Doulard. He's the author of the book that I mentioned I read. It was given to me by my meditation teacher called Body, Mind and Sport, in case you're interested in looking at it. And he's also the former director of player development for the New Jersey Nets, now known as the Brooklyn Nets, which is a basketball team in the US. And you can see a summary of the research that Dr. Doulard has done on the subject of nasal breathing compared with mouth breathing, because that's the comparative study during exercise, and also some other articles that discuss the benefits of nasal breathing during exercise if you just scroll down the page. So top tennis players like Billie Jean King, Martina Navratilova, and Ivan Lendl, and teams like the US men's soccer team and the New Jersey Nets. I mentioned them already. They're a basketball team in the US, have used nasal breathing to help them significantly improve their performance and put themselves in the zone, which is that state of highly enjoyable mind-body integration and peak performance that was so eloquently described by Pele in recalling his experience during the 1958 World Cup final against Sweden. You can see a quote below. In fact, I think I'll read it to you now, because it's a very profound quote, and it talks about this zone state that we can get into, which is not just reserved for athletes. Anyone can do this if you know how. So this is what he had to say in his autobiography called My Life in the Beautiful Game. He was describing an experience during the 1958 World Cup final against Sweden, which is the first World Cup final that Brazil won. And it's when he was only 17, so he was still fairly new on the scene, and that was really where he made his name. He said, this was after Sweden had scored their first goal against Brazil. He said, "We started off again, and suddenly I felt a strange calmness I hadn't experienced in any of the other games. It was a type of euphoria. I felt I could run all day without tiring, that I could dribble through any of their team or all of them, that I could almost pass through them physically. I felt I could not be hurt. It was a very strange feeling, and one I had never felt before." Perhaps it was merely confidence, but I felt confident many times without that strange feeling of invincibility. The goal of Sweden, rather than making us panic all over the show, brought us back to our senses. So a very interesting quote. And there's many others by athletes in other forms of the game that talk about the same kind of state, this optimal zone state, which we can get into if we know how to orchestrate it. Breathing is the quickest, fastest, easiest way of doing that. So where was I? Let me go back to so I was talking about the experiences of some players. You can read some more quotes by players like Billie Jean King on their experience of the zone. She said, "I would transport myself beyond the turmoil of the court to a place of total peace and calm." So this is actually quite a common experience. There are many athletes in all kinds of different sports who have had this zone experience. My own experience of nasal breathing when I was a professional squash player was that it helped me to double my endurance and perform at a higher intensity for longer. And it prevented my body from going into an anaerobic state when the oxygen demanded by my muscles was greater than the oxygen supplied. I also found that breathing through my nose helped me to remain a lot calmer and more focused when I was playing. So I never went into panic mode where I just lost concentration, which I used to do. I used to do before quite often. So even when I was working very hard in tough matches, I was able to stay calm, mentally composed, and in the zone. As I mentioned before, this is because nasal breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system rather than the sympathetic one, which in plain English means that you naturally relax more and you don't go into that fight or flight state that is triggered by excessive mouth breathing. However, despite its obvious benefits, seemingly obvious benefits, nasal breathing isn't something that's widely practiced by athletes and sports people, because most coaches, trainers, and experts in sports science are just not aware of its profound benefits. And so they never teach the sportsmen and athletes they coach and advise how to breathe properly when they're training and competing. One medical doctor who's been in the field of sports medicine and helping athletes and especially professional soccer players and teams for over 30 years, couldn't believe how much that he learned from a 2-hour breathwork workshop that he came to, and that he's implemented a lot of these techniques in his own life. You can read a quote and a testimonial from him if you keep scrolling down the page. It does take time and practice to master breathing through one's nose when performing at intensity and competition. But I managed to teach myself to breathe through my nose while I was training hard or playing competitive squash at a high level in about 4 months. So it's very doable if you just persevere. But you will start experiencing the benefits, which is great endurance, less muscle fatigue, better mind-body integration, significantly improved performance, and perhaps most importantly, more enjoyment of your sport immediately. Some of those anyway. It'll take you a while to get your performance up to the same level with nasal breathing. So you have to be a bit patient about that. But all the other things, that you enjoy, you'll enjoy your training a lot more. You'll start to experience more mind-body integration and just feel more in the zone. That starts happening immediately. I've taught the Ujjayi breathing technique to the Morocco Swallows football team in South Africa. They were a PSL football team at the time. The South African #1 squash player, a South African youth elite swimmer, and a promising junior rower who had problems with exercise-induced asthma, to help them sort their problems out in the case of the junior rower. And the SA youth elite swimmer also had problems. You can read and watch a video by this junior swimmer where he discusses his experience before and after. I did a 2-hour session with him, and I think you find that quite interesting, of just how a very fairly short breath coaching session massively improved his performance at the national championships. So that's the second technique. The third technique I want to talk about briefly is called power breathing. I've mentioned it already, but I want to give you a little bit more detail about it. So this is really for professional, serious sportsmen and athletes. You can do it if you're not. You just want to improve your general performance and health and well-being. But it has a very specific benefit for sportsmen and athletes, because it helps them to start utilizing their full lung capacity. So most professional sportsmen and athletes breathe through their mouths when they're competing and training, and that means that they're using only half or even less of their full lung capacity. If you take a breath now through your mouth, just try doing that, and notice where the air is going. It's really going into your upper chest, isn't it? Now take a nice deep breath through your nose, and notice what happens to your lungs and to your belly. So when you breathe nasally, you start using your full lung capacity, rather than being like a 6-cylinder car firing on only 3 cylinders. If you mouth breathing, you're only using maybe half your lung capacity, maybe even less, and you're still expecting, as a driver, with the car to perform at its best, which is unrealistic. This is about starting to engage your full lung capacity and train your lungs to utilize the full capacity, because there's a whole load of lung capacity down in the deeper parts of your lungs that you probably have never used in your life. So we want to, with the power breathing technique, start to activate that and start to use it. So the third technique that completes the high performance breathing system is this power breathing exercise designed to train your respiratory system to literally fire on all cylinders. In technical terms, this means that power breathing engages the distal alveoli in the deeper lobes of the lungs. So all these little broccoli type things that absorb oxygen in the deeper parts of the lungs, but are normally not perfused with oxygen when you're mouth breathing, because shallow mouth breathing just doesn't engage the diaphragm, which is the breathing muscle at the base of the lungs that pulls air, sucks air into the deeper parts of the lungs when you inhale through the nose, and it expels the air as it releases when you exhale. So that mechanism really helps you to get a maximal inhale and also a full exhale. Now, this power breathing technique was used by Soviet Olympic athletes in the 1960s and 70s, and it was passed down by Volkov, the head Soviet Olympic trainer in this era, to the trainer of the Monaco Olympic team in the 1980s, a guy by the name of Frank. I don't know his surname, who in turn taught it to my mentor, Dr. Barry Spitz. And if you practice this exercise regularly, it's best done sitting down before a training session, or at any time. You don't have to do it before training, but it's a great way to warm up the respiratory system as a respiratory warm-up exercise. It will progressively and systematically expand your functional lung capacity, so that you're ultimately able to use your full lung capacity when playing and training. It enhances and accelerates the effect of Ujjayi breathing, and when done together, these form a potent combination. It will significantly improve your endurance and ensure your performance level doesn't drop because you get tired in the all-important final stages of a race or a match. Barry said this about this issue. He said, the most important lesson for winning in sport is breathing. The guy who gets tired loses. The minute you get tired, you've lost your match. The big thing is not to get tired. So power breathing in combination with the Ujjayi breathing can form the basis of a new type of fitness philosophy for you, based on the efficiency of your breathing rather than the old stress recover, no pain, no gain idea, which doesn't really work particularly well. I found training that way was hard work. I didn't enjoy it very much, and I often got overtired, overtrained, got too fatigued, and I got injured. Maybe you've had the same experience. So it will mean that you don't have to train as hard to be able to perform at the same or an even higher level. I found that it actually doubled my endurance level for the same level of effort, which is quite of perceived effort, which is quite amazing to double your endurance at the same perceived effort level. It will mean that your body doesn't get as fatigued through training and playing, so you stay physically and mentally fresher than your opponents. You don't get as tired in the later stages of matches or races. So if you're a competitive sportsman or athlete, you'll know that that's massive. Whoever gets tired first, all other things being equal, generally loses. So this will give you a significant advantage over your opponents, an advantage that should translate into more wins, better times, and most importantly, more enjoyment and satisfaction from your sport. It's not really about the winning, as you know. It's actually about knowing that you've performed well and that you've enjoyed the experience. So to wrap this video up, I want to just talk a little bit about Pele. I mentioned his quote earlier, which described this amazing experience that he had when he was 17. And I believe one of the main reasons why he was so successful as a footballer was that, apart from being very talented, he had natural talent, no doubt, and he trained hard and he had a good lifestyle throughout his career. He was able to get into and stay in the zone of peak performance more than any other player of his generation. When a player is in this state, he's able to do extraordinary things unconsciously, instinctively, and effortlessly, which is what made Pele such a great player. If the whole team gets into that state, which the Brazilian team did in the 1958 World Cup final against Sweden, then title-winning, cup-winning performances will happen naturally. So whether you're a competitive sports person, an executive, an entrepreneur, a housewife, or even a retired older person, learning the high-performance breathing system will help you to experience the same state of flow, of being in the zone, that world-class sportsmen and women like Pele have experienced in your daily life and activities, because it's not just about world-beating performances. And this idea is reinforced in the best description of flow that I've found by Eckhart Tolle. And this is what he had to say. He said, artistic creation, sports, dance, teaching, counseling, mastery in any field of endeavor implies that the thinking mind is either no longer involved at all, or at least is taking second place. A power and intelligence greater than you, and yet one with you in essence, takes over. There is no decision-making process anymore. Spontaneous right action happens, and you are not doing it. Mastery of life is the opposite of control. You become aligned with the greater consciousness. It acts, speaks, does the works. Now this state of flow, so poetically described by Eckhart Tolle, is where we all want to be all the time, isn't it? But sadly for most people, it's not a state they experience very often, if at all. But here's the thing. Consciously directed breathing is a powerful tool that empowers us to consciously orchestrate and consistently stay in a state of flow. So learning the high performance breathing system will give you the keys to the kingdom of flow. And it will also help you in many other ways. There are many other benefits of incorporating conscious breath work into your lifestyle. It'll help you to lower your stress levels. It'll have more peace of mind and poise under pressure. It will help you to improve your mental clarity and concentration. It will raise your energy levels. You'll tend to sleep better and sleep more deeply. It will increase your productivity and effectiveness in whatever you're doing. It will boost your immune system and your general health. It will enhance your sense of well-being. It will slow down your aging process, and you'll live longer and feel younger. I'm 46, by the way. Most people say I look 10 years younger. And I think there's a big factor behind that is the amount of meditation and breath work that I've done. I've also done other things like looked after myself in terms of exercising regularly and eating a good diet. But I think the meditation and breath work have played a great part in my youthful appearance. So, and finally, it will help you to develop your intuition and creativity and just feel much happier and more fulfilled in your life. So if you like to learn the high performance breathing system, I can teach it to you. Typically that will take 3 sessions of about 1 hour each. It can be delivered in person if you happen to live in or around Johannesburg in South Africa, which is where I'm based currently. Happy to meet you and do it in person, which is always nice. But it can be done just as well via Zoom, remotely via Zoom, which is an online meeting tool that I use, which automatically records the meeting, so you have access to the recordings after the sessions. I'll upload them to YouTube for you, so you've got those to refer back to again and again. Alternatively, you may just feel that 1 or 2 sessions to address a particular breathing problem that you have. Maybe you've got asthma. This kind of breath work, there's a nice trick that I can show you with asthma that generally will sort out most milder forms of asthma. Maybe you've got exercise-induced asthma. Maybe you tend to hyperventilate. Maybe you have panic attacks. Any of those things, 1 or 2 sessions will sort it out. And if you don't want to carry on with the full high-performance breathing program, that's okay. So if you have any questions, or if you'd like to arrange some private breath coaching sessions with me, please do contact me using the contact details that I've given on the page below. Just keep scrolling down. Yes, I do charge for my services, but the rates vary depending on whether I'm doing it in person, traveling, not traveling, or I'm doing it online via the internet, or whether it's for an individual or a group. So I'm not going to give my rates here. Just contact me and we'll discuss it. Speaking of groups, if you happen to be the coach or the manager of a sports team, please feel free to give me a call, and we can discuss how best to teach your team the high performance breathing system, because it can work as well for a team as an individual. And as I mentioned, it can actually help to unify the team if they are all doing it together. So thanks for taking the time to visit this page and watch this video, and I hope to hear from you soon. You can just keep reading for a written version of what I just said, which has some additional information, quotes, and some links to articles that I think you'll find relevant and interesting. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to connecting with you soon. Have an inspired day.